Beware the wrath of a patient soul. When pushed to the edge, even silence can become a weapon sharper than any blade. Welcome, chosen ones. Let's not mince words. The silent strength you carry is your greatest shield and sword. The enemy, cloaked in manipulation and malice, believes themselves to be an unstoppable storm. But the quiet ones, you, are the immovable mountain. And when the storm meets the mountain, it doesn't leave unscathed. It shatters. And to you, the chosen one reading this, thank you. Whether this is your first time here, or you've been a warrior alongside us for a while, your strength and super gifts are the reason the enemy's plans crumble. You're living proof that no psychopath, no terror, no manipulation can stand against someone who knows their worth and wields their power with purpose. If you're ready to go even further, to step fully into your role as the one who flips fear on its head, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a number 777 in the comments as your pledge to rise above and thrive. Let's show them what unstoppable truly looks like. Now, here's the thing about psychopaths. They thrive on fear. They are the architects of chaos, believing their cunning and cruelty are enough to break anyone. They count on confusion, on fear of the unknown, on you stumbling under their manufactured storms. But what they don't see coming is you. You're not the victim they imagined. You're the unshakable force they can't comprehend. Let me paint the scene. The psychopath enters, armed with a mind of calculated terror. They've spent days, weeks, even months rehearsing their game. They see themselves as puppeteers, pulling strings, watching people dance to their wicked tune. But then they meet you, the one who cuts the strings with a glance, a silence, or worse, a laugh. Their fear isn't the dramatic type we see in movies. No, it's deeper, quieter, the kind that spreads like ice in their veins when they realize their greatest weapon, fear, is useless against you. Imagine this. A wolf steps into what it thinks is a flock of sheep. It bares its teeth, prowling, ready to strike. But instead of panic, there's calm. Instead of running, you stand. The wolf hesitates, its instincts faltering, and then it sees your eyes, not the eyes of prey, but a predator it wasn't prepared to face. Psychopaths aren't ready for people like you. You flip the game on them. Their carefully laid traps, you walk right through without a scratch. Their threats, background noise. You are a mirror to their inadequacy, and nothing terrifies them more than realizing they've lost control. Remember this. Not every storm is meant to be feared. Some are meant to cleanse the sky. You're the clear sky after their storm. You don't just scare them away, you expose their weakness for the world to see. They came with chaos, and they left in shambles. So, chosen ones, understand the power you hold. It's not in shouting, fighting, or even proving yourself. Your power is in being, steady, unbothered, and unrelenting. Like an ocean wave crashing over the shore, unstoppable and indifferent to the stones it displaces. They sent a psychopath to terrorize you, thinking they had the upper hand. But you are the end of their game, the immovable mountain they couldn't climb. Their fear doesn't just set them running, it reveals their hollow core. And that, chosen ones, is the ultimate victory. And now let's break it all down step by step, piece by piece. Trust me, if you're truly one of the chosen ones, you won't just want to stay. You'll feel compelled to stay until the very end. This is where the real power unfolds. Number 1. Silent thunder, the aura that sends predators running. Power isn't always loud. It's often the silent force that makes even the strongest hesitate. Your aura isn't just an extension of you. It's your armor, your sword, and your silent thunder. They thought they could walk into your life, dominate your energy, and terrorize you into submission. What they didn't expect was the invisible wall of strength they would encounter the moment they entered your space. They came ready for a battle they thought they could win, only to find themselves stumbling back, disoriented, their weapons of manipulation rendered useless. What is it about your presence that causes this shift? It's not something they can touch or name, but it's undeniable. Your aura isn't loud or showy. It doesn't scream for attention. Instead, it's a quiet storm, steady and commanding, like the hum of distant thunder that promises a storm they aren't prepared to face. When they step too close, they don't just see your power, they feel it, and that's what terrifies them. For someone who thrives on fear and chaos, the shock of meeting someone immune to their tactics is like running into an invisible wall. Psychopaths rely on finding cracks in their prey, insecurities, doubts, or the slightest hint of fear. But when your aura is grounded in unshakable confidence, there's nothing for them to latch onto. They find themselves lost, like a predator stepping into a terrain they can't navigate. Even the fiercest predator trembles before an unflinching gaze. That's you. Your calm, collected energy acts like a mirror, forcing them to see their own weaknesses, their inadequacies. They came to unnerve you, but it's their own nerves that start to fray. They miscalculated, thinking they were the storm, but you're the mountain, unyielding and immovable. But let's address the questions that might be bubbling up in your mind. How do I maintain this aura? What if they push harder? What if I feel fear? Let me tell you this. Feeling fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What sets you apart is your ability to rise above it. Fear is a tool. They want to use it to paralyze you, but you can turn it into fuel. Every time you face them, every time you refuse to flinch, you strip them of their power. Remember this. A calm sea does not mean weakness. It means depth. Your calm is what unsettles them the most. They're used to triggering reactions, but your steady presence leaves them floundering. They can't manipulate what doesn't respond. The more they push, the more they expose themselves, and that's when the tables turn. Their fear of being exposed, of losing control, becomes the very thing that sends them running. Now, imagine this. A hawk circles a rabbit, sure of its next meal. But as it swoops in, the rabbit doesn't run. It doesn't cower. Instead, it stands still, its eyes locked on the predator. The hawk hesitates. Its instincts are thrown off. It doesn't understand why its prey isn't afraid. That hesitation is all it takes for the hawk to realize it might not be the one in control after all. That's what happens when they meet you. They expect fear, but they find stillness. They anticipate weakness, but they meet strength. They come armed with games, but you don't play along. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifts. You're not their victim, you're their undoing. Your aura isn't just a shield, it's a weapon. It sends a message they can't ignore. This is not the prey you were looking for. They feel it in their gut, even if they don't fully understand it. That unshakable energy you radiate dismantles their confidence, erodes their strategies, and leaves them scrambling to escape. So, chosen one, know this. Your aura alone is enough to turn their terror back on them. You don't have to fight their games directly. You just have to stand in your truth, grounded and unbothered. Their fear of losing control will do the rest. And when they retreat, as they always do, you'll know it wasn't their games that defined the encounter. It was your power, your presence, your silent thunder that sent them running. They underestimated you once. They won't make that mistake again. Number 2. When the predator sees its reflection, you became their mirror. People fear mirrors not because they lie, but because they show the truth. They came into your life armed with every trick they knew: manipulation, control, intimidation. They believed they were untouchable, masters of the game, skilled at bending others to their will. But what they didn't count on was you. You didn't engage with their tactics or fall for their traps. Instead, you stood still, unshaken, and in your stillness, you became their mirror. And that's the one thing they couldn't handle. Imagine this: a master illusionist dazzles a crowd, conjuring tricks so convincing that no one dares question their reality. But then, someone places a mirror beside the stage. Suddenly, every sleight of hand, every secret mechanism, every flaw is exposed. The audience doesn't see the magic anymore. They see the tricks. That's what you did to them. You didn't challenge their game directly. You revealed it for what it was. The psychopath thrives on their ability to manipulate, to exploit insecurities and fears. They seek control by preying on doubts. But when they looked at you, they didn't find the cracks they were searching for. Instead, they saw a reflection of their own instability, their own desperation. For someone who prides themselves on being the puppet master, that's the ultimate defeat. But let's dive deeper into their unraveling. Psychopaths operate under the belief that they are always one step ahead, that no one can see through their carefully constructed facade. Yet, your mere presence shattered that illusion. How? Because you didn't react the way they expected. You didn't panic or fight or crumble. Instead, you stayed steady, forcing them to face the one thing they've spent their entire lives avoiding: themselves. Nothing terrifies the manipulator more than someone who refuses to be manipulated. The more they pushed, the more their own weaknesses became glaringly obvious, not just to you, but to themselves. They saw the cracks in their own armor, the gaps in their strategies. Every time they tried to rattle you and failed, they exposed another layer of their own insecurity. It wasn't you who was falling apart, it was them. Think of it like this: they came to you with a mask, confident that it would hide their true face. But when they looked into your eyes, they saw the reflection of what was behind the mask, and it scared them. They weren't prepared to see their own fear, their own vulnerability staring back at them. That's the power of a mirror. It doesn't attack, it doesn't judge, it simply reflects the truth. For someone who relies on control to maintain their sense of power, this is the ultimate humiliation. They thrive on chaos because they believe they can dominate it. But you didn't play by their rules. You didn't give them the reactions they craved. And in doing so, you flipped their game upside down. They came to dominate, but instead, they found themselves overwhelmed by their own chaos. Now, let's address the questions that might arise here. What if they try harder? What if they don't back down? How do I maintain this strength? The answer lies in understanding the true power of your presence. You don't need to outsmart them or match their manipulations. You simply need to continue being the mirror. The more you reflect their flaws, the more they unravel. Remember, the strongest defense is to let your opponent defeat themselves. That's exactly what happens when you hold your ground. Psychopaths expect resistance because resistance validates their need for control. But when you don't resist, when you simply exist as a steady, unflinching presence, they have nothing to fight against. Their energy collapses in on itself, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Imagine again the master illusionist, now standing on stage with nowhere to hide. Their audience has seen the wires and the trapdoors. They've lost the element of mystery, the power of deception. That's what you've done to the manipulator in your life. You've taken away their tools, not by attacking them, but by showing them for what they truly are. So, chosen one, know this: Your power lies in your refusal to be drawn into their chaos. You don't have to fight them on their terms. By simply standing firm, by refusing to flinch, you turn the tables. They can't dominate someone who doesn't fear them, and when their reflection becomes too much for them to bear, they'll retreat, not because you chase them away, but because they can't face the truth you've shown them. You didn't just survive their games, you destroyed them by being exactly who you are: calm, steady, unshakable. The mirror they feared the most. Number 3. The unreadable force. When mystery becomes power. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is the unknown. It leaves no weaknesses to exploit, no moves to predict. Psychopaths walk into every interaction thinking they're the puppet master. They've perfected the art of reading people, decoding every expression, every hesitation, every flicker of fear in the eyes of their target. It's their edge, their way of controlling the game. But then they met you, a closed book with no pages to turn. And in that moment, their entire strategy fell apart. Your unreadability wasn't just a barrier, it was a fortress. They tried to analyze you, to poke and prod for cracks, but all they found was silence. Not the silence of fear or confusion, but the silence of composure, the kind of calm that speaks louder than words. They couldn't read you, and that drove them into a frenzy. For someone who thrives on knowing their opponent's every move, you became their worst nightmare, an enigma they couldn't solve. Let's break this down. A psychopath's power lies in predictability. If they can anticipate your reaction, they can control it. They wanted to see fear in your eyes, a tremor in your voice, or even anger that they could twist to their advantage. But you gave them nothing. You didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait, and that unnerved them. It wasn't that you were hiding anything. It was that you didn't need to show anything at all. Imagine a chess player who relies on their opponent telegraphing their next move, a glance, a nervous twitch, a hand hesitating over a piece. But when they play against you, all they see is a blank stare. They don't know if you're about to strike or stand still, and that uncertainty shakes their confidence to its core. That's what it feels like to face someone like you. They wanted to see the game board clearly, but you blurred the lines, leaving them unsure of where to step next. This is where the true torture begins for them. Their entire identity is built on control, on being one step ahead. But when they can't predict you, when every move they make feels like walking blindly into a trap, their confidence crumbles. They become erratic, desperate for clarity, and in their desperation, they reveal their own weaknesses. You didn't need to attack them. They destroyed themselves trying to decipher you. And here's the beauty of it. This power wasn't about deception or playing games. It came from your authenticity, your refusal to be anyone other than who you are. You didn't need to react, explain, or defend yourself. Your unreadability wasn't a tactic. It was a natural extension of your calm, grounded energy. You didn't play their game, and that was enough to shatter theirs. Strength isn't always in action. It's in restraint, in the refusal to be predictable. So what happens when a psychopath meets someone they can't control? They panic, they stumble, they retreat. Their carefully rehearsed tactics become useless, their confidence wavers, and their sense of dominance vanishes. For them, not knowing what comes next is the ultimate fear. And for you, it's the ultimate advantage. You didn't need to outsmart them, intimidate them, or confront them. By simply being unreadable, you dismantled their game piece by piece. They came looking for a target they could manipulate, but instead, they found a mystery they couldn't unravel. And in the face of the unknown, even the strongest lose their footing. That's the power of unreadability. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about being unshakably yourself. You don't have to reveal your hand because you are the hand. Every move they tried to make against you only revealed how little they truly understood. And that, chosen one, is why you always leave them questioning, trembling, and ultimately defeated. Number 4. The eye of the storm, the power of unflinching calm. Calmness is not weakness. It's a lion quietly watching the chaos, knowing it is in control. Psychopaths are architects of chaos, experts at stirring emotional storms and feeding on the turbulence they create. They thrive on reactions, fear, anger, confusion. They wield these emotions like weapons, confident they can break anyone under the weight of their manipulation. But when they faced you, they encountered something they couldn't comprehend: unflinching calm. It was like running headfirst into a wall they didn't see coming. Your stillness was a force they weren't prepared for. No panic in your eyes, no rise in your voice, no desperate attempts to prove yourself or fight back. Instead, you met their chaos with an unyielding steadiness that stripped their tactics of power. They came to rattle you, to pull you into the storm, but instead, they were the ones left unsettled. Imagine this: a storm raging across the sea, wild and unrestrained, expecting the waves to crash in chaos. But instead of chaos, it meets an unshakable cliff, unmoving and unaffected by the winds. That's you, the immovable presence in the face of their storm. For someone who feeds on control, your calmness wasn't just frustrating, it was terrifying. It sent a clear message: you don't scare me, you don't control me, I see right through you. That kind of unwavering confidence is kryptonite to a manipulator. They rely on emotional energy to fuel their power, but your calmness left them empty-handed, like a fire starving for oxygen. The more they pushed, the more futile their efforts became. They couldn't provoke you, couldn't draw you into their chaos. Instead, they were forced to confront their own lack of control. For someone who prides themselves on being the puppet master, that realization is devastating. Your calmness didn't just defy them, it exposed them. It revealed their dependence on chaos and their inability to function when it was denied to them. Nothing is more unsettling to the storm than a mountain that refuses to move. Chaos is their comfort zone, their battleground, but your calmness dragged them into foreign territory. It wasn't just silence, it was dominance without aggression, power without force. You didn't need to fight back, because your presence alone sent a message louder than any words could. They came expecting a battle, but you offered them an abyss, an emptiness they couldn't control or navigate. For them, the storm was supposed to be their weapon, but against your calm, it became their downfall. They weren't ready for someone who could hold their ground without lifting a finger. They weren't ready for you. Your unflinching calm was more than just a response. It was a statement of power. It didn't just neutralize their chaos, it overpowered it. In the end, they didn't just fail to shake you, they were the ones left shaken. Number 5. The predator's nightmare: fear turned inside out. Fear has a way of finding its rightful owner. Psychopaths wield fear like a sculptor uses a chisel, carefully carving out control from chaos. They expect their targets to crumble, their minds to spiral, and their confidence to shatter. But when they turned their gaze on you, they miscalculated. The fear they sought to impose didn't cling to you. Instead, it ricocheted back, striking them with a force they didn't anticipate, a weapon turned against its master. You didn't flinch, you didn't stutter, and most importantly, you didn't react the way they expected. That absence of reaction wasn't just resistance, it was a revelation. They began to realize that their power wasn't real, that it had always relied on the cooperation of their targets. Fear, for all its sharp edges, is only as effective as the response it provokes. And in your calm, unyielding presence, their illusion of control began to crack. They tried harder. They pushed with threats, manipulation, and psychological games. But the harder they tried, the more desperate they became. Each attempt to assert dominance only exposed their own fragility. They weren't prepared for someone like you, someone who didn't cower or fight back in expected ways. Your quiet confidence, the way you refused to be rattled, became their undoing. Imagine this: a predator prowls the forest, certain of its dominance over the prey it stalks. It lunges, but the prey doesn't run. It doesn't hide. Instead, it stands firm, its eyes unblinking, its presence unshaken. The predator hesitates, its instincts faltering. In that moment, the hunter becomes the hunted, not by force, but by the sheer power of the unexpected. That's what happened when they faced you. Their weapon of fear, so precise and effective against others, was useless in your presence. In fact, it began to turn on them. Fear feeds on uncertainty, and when you refused to give them any reaction to latch onto, they became the ones caught in its grip. The same crushing weight they had used to dominate others now settled on their own shoulders. They started to question themselves, to feel the sting of doubt gnawing at their confidence. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. Their attempts to cast you as the victim only highlighted their own vulnerabilities. They came expecting an easy victory, a performance in which they played the predator and you the prey. But the script flipped, and they found themselves cornered by their own tactics. Your presence wasn't just resistant, it was transformative. It turned fear into a double-edged sword, one they could no longer wield without cutting themselves. For the first time, they experienced the uncertainty and powerlessness they had so often inflicted on others. The predator tasted the bitterness of fear, and it was a flavor they couldn't stomach. And that's the beauty of your strength. You didn't need to fight back physically or match their manipulations. Your calm, unshakable demeanor did all the work. It exposed their weaknesses, flipped their tactics, and left them reeling. The fear they tried to impose became theirs to bear. In the end, they didn't just lose control of the game, they lost control of themselves. Fear, the weapon they'd mastered, had turned inside out, and the weight of it brought them to their knees. You didn't just survive their attempts to dominate, you dismantled their illusion of power. And that, chosen one, is the ultimate victory. Number 6. The fortress they couldn't breach. The power of unyielding boundaries. Strong boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're mirrors reflecting the power of self-respect. Psychopaths thrive on invasion. They push, prod, and manipulate, always seeking the cracks in someone's defenses. They count on their ability to sneak past walls and infiltrate spaces that should be sacred. But with you, they hit something they weren't prepared for. A boundary so unyielding it didn't just keep them out. It shattered their illusion of control. Your boundaries weren't loud proclamations or dramatic ultimatums. They didn't need to be. They were quiet, resolute, and impenetrable, born from a deep understanding of your worth. You didn't need to defend them with arguments or anger. Your boundaries stood on their own, a fortress of self-respect that spoke volumes without you uttering a word. And to the manipulator, this was devastating. They weren't prepared for someone who wouldn't flinch, wouldn't falter, and wouldn't bend, no matter how hard they pushed. For a predator who thrives on finding weaknesses, encountering someone like you is unnerving. They tested, they pried, and every time they were met with the same unspoken message: "You have no power here." Imagine a thief approaching a vault, fully confident they can crack it open, only to realize the lock is impenetrable. Every attempt not only fails, but makes them look increasingly desperate and foolish. That's the dynamic you created. They wanted access to your emotions, your vulnerabilities, your energy, but you denied them at every turn. Not by fighting them, but by simply refusing to open the door. Every time they tried to manipulate you, they ran headfirst into the same truth. You valued yourself too much to allow even the smallest piece of their chaos into your life. And for someone who builds their power on breaking others, this was an unbearable blow. Boundaries aren't just about keeping others out. They're about defining who you are. Your boundaries were more than just limits. They were declarations of strength, self-respect, and clarity. They told the world, and anyone daring enough to test them, what you would and would not tolerate. To the psychopath, this was more than frustrating. It was humiliating. They weren't used to being denied access, to being told no without hesitation. Every time they tried to push past your limits, they revealed not your weakness, but their own. They weren't strong enough to break you, and they knew it. And as their frustration grew, so did their defeat. They hurled themselves at your fortress, only to find that the harder they pushed, the more futile their efforts became. The energy they once used to dominate others was now being wasted on someone who refused to be moved. By the time they realized they'd lost, it was too late. They had exhausted themselves trying to conquer the unconquerable. In the end, your boundaries didn't just keep them out. They reflected a truth they couldn't ignore. You were untouchable. No amount of manipulation or force could breach the walls you'd built, because those walls weren't made of fear or insecurity. They were made of self-respect. And that is the ultimate power. They came to control, to invade, to conquer. But instead, they found themselves standing outside, powerless and defeated. Your unyielding boundaries didn't just protect you, they revealed the emptiness of their power. You didn't need to fight them, your strength spoke for itself. And in that silence, their defeat was absolute. Number 7. Seeing through shadows, the superpower of awareness. Awareness is the ability to see the unseen and understand what others try to hide. Psychopaths thrive in the shadows, weaving their manipulation where they think no one is looking. They rely on stealth, subtlety, and the ignorance of their targets to stay in control. But when they encountered you, their game fell apart. Why? Because you saw them, not the facade they carefully constructed, but the truth they fought so hard to conceal. From the moment they entered your space, you noticed everything. Their words, their gestures, the subtle inconsistencies in their stories. It all clicked together in your mind, like pieces of a puzzle they didn't even know you were solving. They thought they were invisible, but your awareness turned their stealth into transparency. It was as if you were reading a script they hadn't realized you already memorized. This wasn't about confrontation or proving them wrong. You didn't need to shout or point fingers. Your awareness alone was enough to unravel them. Every time they spoke, every move they made, you were already 2 steps ahead, calmly watching their every attempt at manipulation fall flat. They were playing a game you had already mastered, and their frustration showed. The power of awareness isn't just about seeing, it's about understanding. It's recognizing patterns and motives, predicting their moves before they make them, and staying unshaken while they scramble for control. Psychopaths expect their victims to be blind to their tactics, but you shattered that expectation. Their charm, their tricks, their so-called brilliance. To you, it was predictable, even laughable. Imagine a predator that thrives on staying hidden, stalking its prey unnoticed. But then its cover is blown. The prey doesn't run, it simply turns and locks eyes with the hunter. The predator freezes, its advantage gone. That's the effect your awareness had on them. It stripped them of their power and left them exposed, vulnerable, and unsure of their next move. What truly shook them wasn't just that you saw them, it was how you responded. You didn't play into their hands or react the way they expected. Instead, you stood firm, unbothered, as if to say, "I see you, and you don't scare me." That unspoken message turned the tables, shifting the dynamic entirely. They came in as the hunter, but in your presence, they became the hunted. Their usual strategy, exploiting without being noticed, crumbled under the weight of your gaze. They felt seen, but not in the way they craved. You didn't see them as powerful or clever. You saw them as they truly were, desperate, fragile, and deeply flawed. It was a kind of exposure they couldn't handle. In the end, this wasn't a fight of physical strength or loud confrontation. It was a quiet, unseen victory, born from your ability to perceive the truth. Your awareness didn't just protect you, it dismantled them. By stripping away their mask and refusing to engage in their games, you left them powerless, a shadow of the predator they thought they were. Remember, awareness is more than just knowing. It's the ability to wield that knowledge with precision and purpose. And that's exactly what you did. They underestimated you because they couldn't comprehend the depth of your perception. But now, they know. In the presence of true awareness, their tricks don't just fail, they backfire. Number 8. When the puppeteer loses the strings, you rewrote the script. They tried to write your story, but you held the pen. Psychopaths thrive on control, crafting a script for every encounter. In their minds, you were just another character, cast as the victim in a narrative they had perfected. They entered, ready to direct, pull strings, and watch you crumble under their manipulation. But you didn't just refuse the role. They watched in shock as you tore up their script and rewrote the entire story before they even knew what was happening. They counted on predictable responses, fear, anger, or submission. They expected to see you stumble, to lash out, or to cower in silence. But instead, you gave them something they couldn't anticipate, your refusal to engage. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. Every time they tried to push you into the mold they had created, they found themselves grasping at air. Their carefully constructed plan fell apart, piece by piece, with every unshaken look you gave them and every moment of calm you maintained. This wasn't just defiance. It was a complete reversal of the dynamic. You didn't play the game, and by refusing to step into their world of manipulation, you forced them into yours. They tried to provoke, but your stillness left them scrambling. They tried to intimidate, but your lack of reaction left them powerless. And in their confusion, they began to unravel. Here's the thing. Psychopaths need a stage, an audience, and a script to thrive. But you denied them all three. You didn't let their words echo in your mind or their actions dictate your responses. By refusing to perform, you stole the spotlight from them, leaving them exposed and powerless in the empty theater of their own making. Imagine a chess player sitting across from an opponent who refuses to move a single piece. The strategist, no matter how skilled, has no game to play. That's what happened when you rewrote the script. They came ready to win a game that never began because you simply didn't play. This wasn't about fighting back or outsmarting them. It was about rendering their tactics useless. You understood the one thing they didn't. The moment you react on their terms, you're playing their game. Instead, you flip the entire board over, leaving them with nothing but the realization that their power only exists if you let it. And that's what terrified them the most. It wasn't that you defeated them, it was that their power dissolved entirely. Every attempt to control you ended in frustration. Every tactic they used fell flat. They didn't leave the encounter victorious or even wounded. They left confused, grasping for a narrative that no longer fit. They realized they weren't the author of this story. You were. They didn't just lose control of the situation, they lost control of themselves. And in the end, it wasn't your resistance that defeated them. It was your refusal to acknowledge the game altogether. That quiet rebellion dismantled their illusion of power, leaving them to walk away not just defeated, but questioning their own place in the stories they thought they controlled. Number 9. Light in the shadows. Your energy was too pure. In the presence of true light, even the deepest darkness begins to fade. Psychopaths are creatures of the shadows. They thrive on fear, manipulation, and chaos, feeding off the negativity they so expertly cultivate. But when they stepped into your presence, they were confronted with something they couldn't manipulate or control: your pure, unyielding energy. It wasn't loud or boastful, it was quiet, steady, and unwavering, a light that exposed the very darkness they relied on. Your energy wasn't just different, it was disruptive. To someone who thrives on chaos, your clarity and peace were like stepping into an entirely foreign world. Every calculated move they made, every lie, manipulation, and intimidation tactic was met with a force they couldn't comprehend. Like waves crashing against a lighthouse, their efforts broke and scattered without leaving a mark. You weren't fighting back with force or aggression. You simply stood as you were, whole, pure, and untouchable. This wasn't about being stronger in the traditional sense. It wasn't about clever words or strategic maneuvers. It was about your essence, the authenticity and self-awareness that radiated from within you. Your light didn't just resist their darkness, it neutralized it. They came armed with the tools they'd used on countless others, only to find that none of them worked against you. Think of it like trying to light a match in a storm. Their tactics, so effective elsewhere, were rendered useless by the purity of your presence. You didn't fight their fire with fire. You drowned it with something they couldn't extinguish. And for someone who thrives on control, that's the ultimate nightmare. They weren't just unable to manipulate you, they found themselves exposed, vulnerable, and unmoored, unable to function in the face of your light. Imagine this: a predator stalking its prey under the cover of darkness, confident in its ability to dominate. But suddenly, the sun rises, illuminating every shadow, stripping away the predator's advantage. That's what your energy did. It didn't just repel their darkness, it made it irrelevant. Their control, their manipulation, their carefully crafted chaos, it all dissolved in the clarity of your light. And here's the most important part: they didn't just fail to dominate you, they were forced to confront the emptiness of their own darkness. Every ounce of negativity they projected was reflected back onto them, amplified by the purity of your presence. They were left scrambling, their confidence shattered, their power rendered meaningless. This is the power of light. It doesn't have to fight the dark. It simply exists, and in its presence the dark disappears. You didn't try to defeat them. You didn't even engage with their games. You just were, a force of clarity, peace, and authenticity they couldn't begin to comprehend. They came expecting another easy conquest, another victim to bend to their will. Instead, they found themselves overwhelmed, undone by something they didn't understand. Your energy wasn't just untouchable, it was transformative. It revealed their shadows, neutralized their chaos, and left them powerless. In the end, it wasn't their failure to dominate you that broke them. It was their realization that they couldn't even touch you. Their darkness couldn't compete with your light, and it never will. Number 10. Not alone. The invisible army they never saw coming. They thought they were fighting one, but in your shadow stood countless unyielding forces. When the psychopath targeted you, they thought they saw the full picture. One person, isolated, vulnerable. A perfect opportunity for control. But what they didn't see, and couldn't comprehend, was the invisible presence surrounding you, a force so vast it rendered their tactics useless. What they thought was a solo battle turned out to be an unwinnable war, one where they were outnumbered and outmatched before they even began. You weren't just standing on your own. Behind you was a wall of power, built brick by brick over lifetimes. Ancestral strength, spiritual protection, and the unshakable resilience forged through your own battles. They came to break you, not realizing they were stepping into a fight with everything that had shaped you. Your presence alone carried the weight of something far greater, something unyielding, and it sent a chill down their spine. For someone like them, who relies on isolation to weaken their prey, this realization was their undoing. They thrive on the belief that their target is alone, cut off, and defenseless. But you were never alone. Whether they could articulate it or not, they felt it. Every word they tried to weaponize, every move they calculated, was met not just by your resistance, but by an overwhelming energy that said, "You cannot win here." Imagine this. A hunter sets their sights on a single tree in a vast forest, thinking it will fall easily. But as they swing their axe, they realize the tree's roots run deep, connecting to an entire network of strength hidden beneath the surface. They thought they were cutting down one, but they were up against an ancient, unbreakable foundation. That's what it felt like to them. The sudden, crushing realization that you weren't just standing alone, but were rooted in something infinitely larger. This presence, call it ancestral wisdom, spiritual guardians, divine intervention, or simply the culmination of every battle you've already survived, wasn't something they could fight. They might not have understood it, but they felt it, and that was enough. Each time they tried to shake you, they found themselves shaken. Each time they pushed, they felt pushed back by something intangible, yet overwhelming. They didn't just walk away, they retreated, like someone who had stumbled too close to an edge they couldn't see. They didn't just fear you, they feared everything behind you, everything they couldn't comprehend, but knew they could never overcome. In that moment, they faced the truth. This wasn't a battle they could win, not against you, and certainly not against the forces standing with you. And so they fled, not just from the challenge you presented, but from the realization that they were never in control to begin with. They wanted to dominate, to break, to conquer, but instead, they met a strength they couldn't touch. They faced the invisible and learned that what they couldn't see was far more powerful than anything they brought to the table. In their retreat, they confirmed the very thing they feared most. They were outmatched, not just by you, but by everything you represented. They came to defeat you, but instead, they walked away with a truth they'll never forget. You were never alone. And that was the force they couldn't reckon with. Number 11. An earthquake in their illusion. You're a natural disruptor. Truth doesn't fight lies, it dissolves them. Psychopaths thrive in worlds built on deceit, weaving their web of lies with precision. drawing others into their carefully constructed illusions. They craft narratives where they are always in control, the puppet masters pulling invisible strings. And for a while, it works. Until someone like you walks in. You weren't just another character in their play. You were the force that tore down the stage. Here's the thing about their manipulation. It's fragile, dependent on everyone playing along, buying into their script. They assumed you would follow the same pattern as everyone else, bend to their control, fall into their traps, and fit neatly into the role they'd assigned you. But instead of stepping into their mold, you shattered it. Your very existence, grounded in authenticity and self-assurance, was enough to make their entire facade crumble. Imagine a carefully built house of cards. It stands tall as long as no one disrupts the delicate balance holding it together. Then you arrive, not as a raging storm, but as a quiet breeze of truth. And everything they've worked so hard to construct begins to fall apart. It wasn't your intention to destroy their world. You didn't even have to try. Your realness, your refusal to play their game, was enough to make their lies collapse under their own weight. This wasn't just about what you did. It was about who you are. Your presence alone was the disruption. Where they relied on masks, you were unfiltered truth. Where they spun stories, you stood firmly in reality. They couldn't figure out how to manipulate you because you didn't react the way they expected. You didn't argue with their lies. You exposed them simply by being genuine. To a liar, the greatest threat isn't confrontation. It's the presence of someone who lives unapologetically in truth. Every move they made to regain control only revealed more cracks in their illusion. Every time they tried to draw you into their chaos, your authenticity cut through it like a blade, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Their masks, which had always worked so well in the past, became useless in your presence. They couldn't hide from you, not because you were actively tearing them down, but because they couldn't sustain their falsehoods in the light of your truth. Think of them as a magician performing a grand illusion. They thrive on distraction, on misdirection, on keeping the audience looking anywhere but at the truth. But you were like a spotlight, illuminating every trick, every false move. Their power wasn't in their actions, but in their ability to keep others in the dark. And you turned on the light. Your refusal to conform wasn't just resistance, it was a declaration. You made it clear that their web of lies couldn't touch you because you simply didn't acknowledge its validity. They couldn't control you because you never gave them permission to. And without control, their entire game unraveled. In the end, they weren't just left powerless, they were left exposed. Their carefully constructed world was nothing more than a fragile illusion, and your presence revealed it for what it was: a hollow, empty game. They underestimated you because they couldn't predict you, couldn't control you, and couldn't withstand the power of your authenticity. You didn't need to fight them. You didn't need to prove anything. You were the earthquake in their illusion, the quiet force that left them scrambling in a world they could no longer manipulate. And that, chosen one, is the kind of power they can never defeat. Number 12. The beginning of their end, when they saw their fall in you. True strength isn't in breaking others, it's in being unbreakable yourself. To a psychopath, power is everything. It's the thread holding together their fractured sense of self. Without control, their world unravels. But when they crossed paths with you, something shifted. You weren't just another person to manipulate or another pawn in their game. You became a symbol of their inevitable collapse, the embodiment of everything they feared but could never admit. Your presence alone was a threat, not because you attacked or confronted them, but because you existed in a way that defied their reality. They thrive on bending others to their will, on exploiting insecurities and weaving chaos. Yet, when they looked at you, they saw someone who couldn't be bent, couldn't be intimidated, and refused to crumble under their games. That quiet defiance, the effortless strength you carried, was louder than any scream and sharper than any blade. For them, it was like hearing the tick of a clock counting down. Every second spent in your presence reminded them that their power was a fragile illusion, built on lies and manipulation. They had crafted a kingdom of fear, but you weren't afraid. Their control over others fed their ego, but you were untouchable. In you, they saw the end of their reign, and that realization was terrifying. Imagine a predator staring into a still, unflinching gaze, only to realize it has miscalculated. That's what they felt. Your unwavering strength exposed the truth they desperately tried to hide from themselves, that their power was hollow, dependent entirely on the weakness of others. You weren't just strong, you were their mirror, showing them the cracks in their own armor. And for someone who thrives on domination, seeing their own vulnerability is a nightmare. Your strength wasn't dramatic or loud. It was calm, steady, and unrelenting. Like a towering cliff against a raging sea, you stood unmoved while their chaos crashed around you, revealing its futility. Every attempt to provoke you, to shake you, only underscored their own instability. The louder they roared, the more evident it became that their power was nothing more than an act, a desperate performance to mask their inner fragility. And then came the moment they couldn't ignore, the realization that everything they had built, every manipulation, every victory, was unsustainable. In you, they saw the truth of their future. A crumbling facade, a life ruled by fear of exposure, and the eventual collapse of their fragile empire. You weren't just a challenge to their control. You were the embodiment of the end they'd been running from their entire lives. It wasn't a battle they could win. Not against someone who refused to play their game, who exposed their weaknesses without lifting a finger, and who stood as a constant reminder of their impending downfall. You were their reckoning, not because you sought it, but because your very presence forced them to confront a truth they couldn't bear. And so they retreated, not because you overpowered them, but because they couldn't face the reflection of their own failure. In you, they didn't just see resistance, they saw their end. And so, chosen ones, let this be your reminder. You are the storm they can't withstand, the mirror they can't face, and the force that turns their games to dust. Your strength, calm yet unyielding, exposes their weaknesses and ensures their eventual retreat. Every step you take in your power reminds them that their reign is over and their end is inevitable. If this resonates with you, smash that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a number 777 in the comments to claim your power. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the chosen ones rise together.